Today, we're going to talk about a book that has made millions of people rethink their views on life, happiness, and success.
Mark Manson's book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, debunks many popular concepts about how to achieve success and be happy. This is not another book with advice on how to become better, richer, and more successful. Manson offers something much deeper and more radical, learning to stop worrying about unnecessary things and focus on the truly important things in life. Instead of constantly chasing perfection, he teaches us to accept failure, suffering, and our own mistakes as an integral part of the journey. Today, we're going to break down the main ideas of the book in detail and look at how they can be applied to our daily lives. Here we go. First, don't try. Let's start with the first and perhaps one of the most paradoxical ideas in the book, don't try. Modern society imposes a huge number of expectations on us. Be successful, be rich, be healthy, be attractive, be happy. We immerse ourselves in the chase for these goals, often without thinking about why we want it in the first place. However, Manson suggests that we abandon our imposed standards of success and recognize that we don't have to be the best at everything. Mark gives an example from the life of writer Charles Bukowski, who is a prime example of how giving up trying to please everyone can lead to real success. Bukowski was a failure for most of his life. He worked at low-paying jobs, struggled with alcoholism and depression. One day, however, he realized that life was too short to try to please everyone. In the end, he just started writing the way he felt, and it led him to great success. The phrase on his grave reads, "Don't try," and it has become the quintessential expression of his philosophy of life. Realize that not everything in life needs to be tried to change or improve. Sometimes accepting your own non-ideality allows you to let go of unnecessary pressures and start living a more fulfilling and happy life. Stop trying to conform to other people's standards. Focus on what is important to you and stop trying to be the best at everything. Second, happiness is a problem. One of the main ideas that readers are confronted with is that happiness does not come from avoiding problems, as it may seem at first glance. Argues that happiness is not a state that can be achieved by removing all troubles and difficulties from one's life. In fact, happiness lies in solving those problems that are important to you. And if you think you can be happy when you don't have any problems, you are wrong. The key example the author gives relates to his experience of moving to Brazil. He lived in Rio de Janeiro and dreamed that the city would be the epitome of the perfect life for him. Constant sunshine, beaches, and relaxed atmosphere. However, he soon encountered many problems. Language barrier, difficulties in adaptation, lack of understanding of local customs. Instead of enjoying life on the beach, he was constantly solving problems. And it was at that moment that he realized that happiness is not the absence of problems, but choosing the right problems to solve. Think about what problems you really care about and solve them. Stop looking for a way to avoid all the troubles in life and learn to choose those problems that bring you satisfaction, even if they are difficult and require effort. Third, you are not special. In today's world, we are used to thinking that each of us is unique and deserves special treatment. From childhood, we're indoctrinated that we're special, that we can do anything, and that the world should revolve around us. However, Manson argues that this is just an illusion and that, in fact, most of us are no different from others. And realizing this fact not only frees us from a huge load of expectations, but also helps us to accept the fact that we don't have to be perfect. The author recalls how, as a child, he was constantly praised for the smallest achievements. This made him feel that he was unique and special and that the world was obliged to recognize his exceptionalism. In real life, however, he faced a harsh truth. No one admired his talents, and no one sought to make exceptions for him. This led to deep disappointment. But once he realized that he was just one of millions of people, his life became easier. He no longer needed to try to prove his uniqueness to anyone. Realize that you don't have to be special. It frees you from the having to constantly prove something and allows you to focus on what really matters to you.
Fourth, the value of suffering. Manson argues that suffering is an inherent part of life, and it is shaped by our values. Our suffering is conditioned by what we believe is important. For example, if your value is money, you will suffer when you fail to earn it. If the appreciation of others is important to you, you will suffer when you are not appreciated. He gives a vivid example from his own life. When he was younger, his core value was the pursuit of success in his career. He worked tirelessly, but despite his best efforts, he could not get the results he wanted. This caused him a tremendous amount of stress and suffering. However, he later realized that his values were false. Once he revised his priorities and replaced his career ambitions with the pursuit of personal growth and inner peace, his suffering was greatly reduced. Determine what values are at the root of your suffering. It may be worth reassessing your priorities and replacing false values with more useful and true ones. This will help you significantly reduce your suffering and begin to live a more harmonious life. Fifth, you always choose. The next important idea in the book is taking responsibility for your life. Manson emphasizes that even when we think we have no control over our lives, in fact, we always have a choice. We cannot control all the circumstances that happen to us, but we can always choose how to react to them and what decisions to make. The author tells the story of a man who found himself paralyzed after an accident. This man could have fallen into depression and blamed fate for his unhappy life. But instead, he took responsibility for his condition and found new meaning in life by helping others in similar situations. This change in perception allowed him not only to cope with his misfortune, but also become happy despite his physical limitations. Realize that you always make choices in every situation. Even if external circumstances seem unfair to you, you can choose how to react to them and what to do next. This will help you feel more in control of your life and stop feeling victimized by circumstances. Sixth, you are wrong about everything, and you never will be. Let's continue discussing how our beliefs shape our lives. Manson argues that most of our beliefs about the world and ourselves are illusions of sorts. And while we are used to relying on our knowledge and opinions, reality is often much more complex than we may realize. Realizing this fact opens the door to humility and helps us avoid unnecessary stress. The author shares a story from his life when he was deeply convinced that his previous relationship ended because of his partner's fault. He was convinced that everything was wrong on her part, and this affected his perception of the new relationship for many years. Later, however, when he reviewed his past, he realized that he himself had made many mistakes that he hadn't even thought about. This change in perception not only allowed him to understand himself better, but also become a more mature and empathetic partner in future relationships. We can't know everything, and we can't always be right. It is important to recognize that our views may be limited or wrong. This step helps us to become open to new knowledge and experiences, and as a result, develop as individuals. Try listening more to those around you and analyzing your beliefs. It can change your life. Seventh, failure is the path to progress. In this chapter, Mark Manson explains that failure is inevitable, and it is what leads us to true success. This goes against most traditional views of failure as something to be avoided at all costs. However, Manson argues that each of our failures is an opportunity for growth and self-improvement. He encourages us not to fear mistakes, but rather to use them as stepping stones to success. He recalls how he tried to start several businesses, but faced failure each time. He lost a lot of money and time until he finally realized that each of his failures brought him valuable lessons. This allowed him to start building a successful career as a writer and blogger. He emphasized that without those failures, he would never have reached the level of success he has now. Failures are not the end of the journey, but an important part of it. Each failure opens us up to new knowledge and experiences that we can use to further our development. It is important to learn to accept failures as part of the process and keep moving forward. 8. The importance of boundaries. In Chapter 8, Mark brings up the topic of personal boundaries and their importance in relationships and life in general. Manson argues that without clear boundaries, we lose ourselves and allow others to manipulate us. Clear boundaries help to maintain self-esteem and respect from others. The author tells about a relationship in which he was unable to set boundaries for a long time. This led to constant conflict and emotional exhaustion. He tried to please his partner, gave up his interests and preferences, which eventually made him unhappy. It was only after he realized the importance of setting boundaries and started standing up for his interests that the relationship became healthier and more harmonious. Establish clear boundaries in both personal and professional relationships. Not only does this help you feel more confident, but it also helps you create healthier and more respectful relationships. 9th, and then you will die. This chapter sounds like the closing thought of the entire book. Manson reminds us that our lives are finite and that realizing our mortality can change our perception of the world and our own actions. Realizing the inevitability of death helps us re-evaluate our priorities and realize that many of the things we worry about don't really matter. The author describes how he traveled to Peru and observed the ancient ruins of the Inca civilization. He realized that despite all the power and achievements of this civilization, it had disappeared, leaving only ruins. It reminded him of the fragility of human life and that everything we do will one day disappear. It allowed him to re-evaluate his goals and realize that many things he thought were important were not really worth his time and effort. Remember that our lives are finite. It helps to let go of unnecessary worries and focus on what really matters. Don't be afraid of the passage of time and don't put off the things that really matter to you. In this video, we break down the main ideas of Mark Manson's book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F***. This book helps us look at life differently and reevaluate our priorities. Instead of constantly chasing success and happiness, it teaches us to focus on what really matters and let go of everything else. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't strive for perfection and accept life as it is, with its problems, joys, and challenges. I hope this review was helpful to you. What book review would you like to see on our channel? Write in the comments. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and check out the next video. See you soon.